But this has been an excruciating election season, and I really feel like I would be kind of copping out if I didn't say something tonight 1 week before the election. And in fact, last week Jeff spoke about fear and spoke with the coming election in mind and the season. Tonight what I want to do is not just talk about fear, but talk about the elections more generally, and then how we can hold it in the context of our spiritual practice. And I think we all know that this election is taking a toll on each of us, very probably. It has certainly taken a toll on our national temperament. Recently, a Harris poll was conducted. It said that more than half adult Americans are experiencing high levels of stress as a result of the election campaign. More than half is what they are saying. And therapists are saying that, people are coming to them talking about the stress, the fear, the anxiety that the election is producing. And someone was quoted, and this was in an article in the Times, quoted as a therapist, as she'd never seen an election like this. It's reminiscent of the stress that was induced in the Civil War, where families are splitting over the election. The families are even splitting over the election. And so in both parties, it's not just one party or another. And so, I assume that this resonates with every one of us. It certainly resonates with me about the anxiety that has been instilled in our society. And I know I don't feel I can add another word about the election that you haven't heard a zillion times now. Probably all of them we've heard many, many times. But as I said, the title of tonight's talk is, Are We There Yet, Mommy? And I will say that the answer to that question is no, we're not. And we won't be even in a week from today, because there's no there. I think that once the elections are over, a lot of us would like to think, relief, at least we're going to have some kind of normality. Certainly there'll be some sort of change. But the idea that things are going to return to normal, I think, is really, truly not going to happen. I think that we need to look at why, at the roots. This isn't just about two political parties. There are profound roots to this change that's coming up, and I think maybe we know them all, but I will just say them. Maybe it'll be helpful, maybe not. Some people have said it's like the tectonic plates in our life are shifting. The socioeconomic issues are different. Technology has made a profound difference. I mean, we all know about the difference that technology has created in industries. It's transforming some, it's eliminating others. It has created tremendous differences in our social life, the way we relate to each other. I just learned a new acronym, which may be old for you, but it's FOMO. Fear of missing out. Yes, some people know it. Fear of missing out. We're addicted to our electronic devices. Many people. And you've got to pick it up and fear that we're going to miss something. What kind of communication is that? It's the very, very superficial, is it not? Very superficial. Global changes in the climate are occurring, right? And the fact is, there's still people who are denying that. Scientists who are researching global climate change are being under attack and are experiencing lawsuits. Organizations have been established to tell scientists how they can protect themselves from lawsuits, from the climate change deniers. I mean, it's just a huge issue. And then, in addition to these profound changes, there is the social change that's occurring here. And that is the change, the movement that is away from, I would say, conservative, this is going to sound, male values, to a more diverse society more diverse values in which we respect diversity, people of all nationalities, religious persuasions, sexual orientation, all of it. This is rising, it's increasing in our society, and this is the backlash to it. People who have, and particularly, but not only, white males who have dominated are feeling threatened, which also brings in the gender issue, which is very much a part of this. Part of the rancor against Hillary Clinton is rooted in the fact that she's a female. Not only that she is what someone called an imperfect politician. This is true. It seems to me almost all politicians are. But certainly she's not a perfect politician, but this anger toward her is partly rooted in the fact that she's a woman. And as a woman, she threatens. It's a threat to what has always existed. And then also tectonic plates. Huge wealth is being accumulated by some, and others are being left out on the margins. A huge class of people, and we know we're talking largely people in rural areas, but also people who've never had that wealth, even are some of them declining in wealth, and I don't have statistics, and I'm not even going to try to back that up. But there are many, many people who are losing out, or at least aren't gaining, as a smaller minority is gaining. And we know, we've been hearing about our rural areas, the devastation in the rural areas as they've been overlooked economically, as their industries have disappeared. It's kind of like third world countries in some place, the opioid epidemic and so forth. So what we're facing, none of this is going to go, I don't think we can expect any of this to go away, although, like Pooh in this cartoon, we would like to think, once we're there yet, this will be a relief. And I don't think that's very realistic. Any of you who have heard me talk before know that I usually or very often focus on what we might call pure awareness, the background area of our attention. What do I mean by that? The foreground, what we are usually taken up with, are the phenomena of our daily life, the contents, the stuff that we know very well. And I even see some people who have been here often kind of like, what's this? Pure awareness, the background of attention. The background, what is absolutely present at all times. And we can call it pure awareness, non-duality. That's what I often talk about. And then show the interrelationship between that and everyday life. Tonight, I'm just going to say, that's not what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be talking about the river of phenomena. I'm going to be talking about the elections and how we, in our everyday relative practice, and I mean in our everyday life, are called on to relate to the tensions that have happened. I think that the election, this campaign in particular, for all of its excruciating elements, is a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call to all of us. And I think, first of all, the call is none of this stuff can be finally swept under the carpet any longer. At least we can't sweep it under the carpet and expect to have peace. We may try to sweep it under the carpet, but there's not going to be peace. And part of that is a wake-up call. The whole class of people, and now I'm talking about the white working class, has found its voice. And it is an angry and really a loud voice. And now I'll quote, since I was emboldened already to use a four-letter word, I'll quote what somebody had said, and their comment was, from the white working class, they said they're voting with their middle finger. And I think that sounds pretty descriptive. But they can't be ignored. Somehow or another, our system has to include that. It has to include them. Also, I think this election campaign wake-up call, it has highlighted the impermissibility. It's impermissible. It's not acceptable to assault women and to treat them dismissively. It's really calling on people, both women and men, to recognize that. And this some of the astounding things that have been said about women has inspired a lot of women to speak up, and that's empowered them. That's empowered the women. So we've heard a lot about that, but there's one more element that I think this campaign has highlighted that we don't much hear about and that I would like to talk about tonight. And what's not discussed is I think this campaign and the tension of it all has really highlighted and underscored the importance of us in our practice, to continue our spiritual practice. It has, to me, and I hope for all of us, made it so obvious how important spiritual practice is. It's the lifesaver as we live in these tremendously tense and in many ways very ugly times. And also some beautiful aspects to it, not just ugly, we all know that. But all this tension. So what I'd like to focus on tonight is to briefly, and I say briefly, survey 3 different aspects of our spiritual practice that I think are critical as we live in a world that is tumultuous, that's divisive, that's polarized, where truth often has no credibility any longer. 3 areas, and those are: 1, ethical, moral behavior, taking personal responsibility. The second is dealing with difficult emotions using our spiritual practice. And the third is practicing loving kindness. Now, if you've attended any other talk here, you've heard bushels about all 3 of these. For many of you, this isn't going to be new. And yet the truth is, it doesn't go away. It continues to be relevant. It continues to be what's important. So hopefully, if you have heard it many, many times, well, what I have often discovered is, it's not that the stuff that I'm hearing is the same, it's I'm different. And as I change, things take on different depths and different understandings. So hopefully that's going to happen for you if you have heard this a zillion times, or if you haven't and it's kind of new, like maybe you'll say, whoa, wow, I never thought of it like that. First of all, ethical behavior. It's one of the foundation stones of this practice, of Buddhist practice in general, of our practice. Ethical behavior. There are 5 precepts, which are moral guidelines. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, they're called commandments. We don't call them commandments because there's nobody commanding. But these are just basic, universal guidelines that make sense if you want to have a happy life. Last winter, I guess it was, we had a 6-week course on Thursday nights that focused on the precepts. Some of you were in that. And I'm wondering if anybody would like to remind us what the 5 precepts were. Please. Somebody. Yes, Phil.
Don't do violence. Don't take what is not freely offered. Don't abuse intoxicating materials. Don't lie and gossip. And don't use sexual energy.
Yeah, don't misuse sexual energy. Yes. Thank you. 5 of them. They're just basic guidelines. And there's something I think that for all of us, just to keep in mind, it's so easy, especially if you just kind of absorbed it in the Western tradition, maybe been brought up with it, but it's to think of them as something that's imposed externally on you, like maybe not so welcome. Oh yeah, not supposed to steal, but I don't know, maybe when you were a kid there was something over at a 7-Eleven that was really appealing and oh well, we do it anyway. Well, as adults, what we begin to realize as we practice with these guidelines is they're really not just something that's out there that we need to follow to be good people, which we are not sure that we want to be good in that way. These become like a second nature. We hardly need to think about them because they're so intrinsic. Intrinsic to what? Intrinsic to a life that enables happiness. Because if you really, now all of us at some times or another kind of fail. We fall off the wagon, or whatever you want to call it. We don't remember. But by and large, the effort is to remember, to embody these. And as we more and more do that, we begin to realize, these aren't just rules that are imposed from without. They're not just thou shalt nots. These become practices of the heart. They become practices that we can live that we need to live if we wish to live with joy and happiness. Because you cannot be truly joyful or happy if you're lying or stealing or killing or misusing sex, or if you are addicted to substances. There's no joy there. There might be moments of highs and energies. This is not the joyful life. This is what the living and abiding with the precepts enables us to do, to live with joy. So we try. This is such a beautiful aspect of this practice. It's not setting up a rigid standard and you got to meet it or else you're going to go to hell or be reborn as a worm in dung or whatever. If you believe in multiple lives, you don't have to. Most of us do not. But at any rate, it doesn't matter. You just keep trying. Just keep trying. I think we can also talk about the precepts as taking personal responsibility. I really like that. Somehow I find that really touches something deep. To recognize this is about taking personal responsibility, not trying to get away, because you can get away with something, but it's about who you are as a being, as a human being. And in this season in particular, where personal responsibility seems to be out the window, as we practice, this seems ever more important to really, really do that for your own. Not because anybody's going to say, hey, you're great, or not because you're going to maybe get somewhere and get the attention, but because your heart calls you to do it. Taking personal responsibility to live according to some moral, ethical standard. So what we do when we do that, we reaffirm our commitment. I like what Michelle Obama, I guess we all do. She said, when they go low, we go high. That's what we try to do. We try to go high. And we don't blame ourselves when we fall and forget. We simply pick ourselves up, try to go high again. One of the big issues that pulls us, I guess you'd say pulls us low, is our difficult emotions. Every single human being's got them. If you don't, you're not, have something. We've all got them. We've all had difficult experience. How do you deal with difficult emotions and still go high? Well, I think we need to look at difficult emotions because it's so easy to get stuck in an anger response, or stuck in a depressive response. It's just stuck in all kinds of responses created by disruptive emotions. How is it that we, in our spiritual practice, how can we work with difficult emotions? And I think Gandhi in India, really, he didn't address exactly that, but when he said, be the change you wish to see in the world, that said it all. How can I be the change I wish to see in the world? Well, one thing is living according to some ethical standard. But another thing is not allowing myself to get stuck in difficult emotions. What do I mean by stuck? So often, because we all know, or we have talked often about how the mind has a negativity bias. We tend to see threat, as Phil Davidson said a few weeks ago. Said, when there are 4 threats, we see 12. That's the way the mind works. Negativity bias. How do we, and then of course there's the genuine threats. How do we keep from getting stuck in that downward spiral? Okay, so one of the, I think such a wonderful practice that we have is practicing with the acronym RAINS. Many of you know it. And you do it maybe even automatically. But because there are people who are newer or brand new here, I'm going to talk about RAINS for a moment. That is the acronym RAINS. And what does that mean? It is a way of transforming difficult emotions when they arise. We use R, which means recognize there's a difficult emotion there. Don't just bypass it. We often just barrel through our days. I don't have time for this. I'm too busy. I can't stop to think about it. And maybe we are. But at some point, we're called on to recognize what it is, and the sooner the better. What is it I'm really feeling right now? What's my emotion? And I will tell you from a quote from the Buddha, and it's something that Jeff quoted last week from the same scripture, but there's a little bit of a different take on it that really has impressed me. The Buddha said, before he was awakened, obviously, I guess, he said that when difficult emotions, he's talking about fear, when fear arose, he stopped immediately, right there and then, and he said he subdued his difficult emotions. Okay, let's translate that in modern terms. First of all, he was talking about when he, as a monk, when they were in remote jungle thickets. The monks did a lot of walking across the face of India, and jungle thickets, all alone, tigers, God knows what else, thugs, scary. So he said what he did was he stopped right then and there, and he worked with the difficult emotion. We don't have to think about subdue. I think subdue is too violent a word. It's kind of militaristic, but we can't think of letting go. Or how can we soothe ourselves, get real, and realize hey, wait a minute, this is my mind running wild? Stopping right there and then. We've all got our own remote jungle thickets, and it's often right in the middle of everybody else. A lot of remote jungle thickets going around here. So do it right then, as soon as you can. I don't mean as you're in the middle, you've got a deadline, you've got to get it out. Okay, do that. But for a moment, stop and work with and recognize what's going on, recognizing it. Before I forget to say, there's a handout for RAINS, identifying. I'm going to be talking about it briefly right now, but there's a handout on the table back there. For any of you who would like to pick it up, there's several copies, RAINS, identifying each of these, and you can take it home with you. So that's R. A is accepting the difficult emotion. It means recognizing it's there. Accepting doesn't mean you like it. It means that, yeah, this is what's here. There's anger here. Without blame, no judgment. Oh, I shouldn't be angry, or oh, I shouldn't be bitter, or I shouldn't be jealous, or I shouldn't be whatever I am. No, just this is what's here. Accepting. A, accepting the difficult emotion. I, investigating. This is mindfulness. We investigate. How do we investigate? We get real and say, what's going on in my body? Drop the story of it. It's not he said that and I said that, and they didn't and they should. No, that's where we usually get stuck. Instead, drop that story for a moment. You go into the body. What does this feel like right now? Well, my heart is like a knot, or it's my belly, or my jaws, or my shoulders. Whatever it is, you notice what's really going on. You investigate. You might even want to put your hand on the spot as you try to directly experience the physical sensations in your body. These are real, and we often just bypass them. Like a friend I know who is now a teacher, but he said when he was in his 20s, his head was merely his body was merely a conveyance for his head. That's the way it is for most of us. Our body is just a conveyance for the head. Oh, he's realized, and that's what we're called to realize too. Wait a minute, my body is always expressing. I need to get in touch with it and figure out what's going on. And that means directly. So you investigate when there's a difficult emotion. Every emotion shows up in the body. Find out what it is. Find out what it is. What are the sensations? N in RAINS. N means non-identification. This is a hard one. Like, oh boy, what does that mean? I really like it because it's really hard to understand. What is non-identification? It's realizing this isn't just my anger. It's the anger. I don't have to take it on personally with the burden of the whole world pointing to me. We live our lives through a personal narrative, but it's just not about me. What does that mean? And I know someone from a mindfulness-based stress reduction class. She put her finger right on it. She said she was experiencing some difficult emotion. She was at a stop sign. She was driving at a stoplight. She looked around at the cars around her, and she said she suddenly realized, just like that, it was an insight, that everybody in that area had difficult emotions. Oh, it was an insight. It wasn't just her. Once you really realize non-identification, it's not personal. It's the difficult emotion, not just my difficult emotion, not just my anger. There is a tremendous sense of normalization. It's a relief. If you don't get it, not to worry. If you say, "What's she talking about?" Don't worry about it. Because there are aspects of this teaching, and I see there's some frowns, aspects of this teaching that can't be understood with the intellect. They have to be lived into. They have to be lived into, and it takes time. It comes when it comes. N is one of those. And then S, the last of those, self-compassion. By the way, usually when rain, and it's widely taught, rains are widely taught in our tradition, but it's only as rain without the S. I add an S to it because I think it's really important to talk about self-compassion as part of how we deal with difficult emotions. So, self-compassion, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, in the context not only of self-compassion, but of loving kindness. We've just done, in our meditation, a loving kindness meditation, and I hope for some of you, there was this kind of, I know for many of you, I'm sure, who are experienced meditators, but maybe some of you are new, had some kind of sense of the power of a kindness, of practicing a kindness meditation. I don't mean just being nice and you offer a seat to an old lady on a bus or something. I mean practicing kindness deeply. We do that in our tradition. Kindness is a tender regard for all beings, regardless of who they are. You don't have to like them. You say, what, a tender regard for, and then name your least favorite political figure? How can I have a tender regard for that person? Well, it goes deeper than whether you like them. It comes from the inside. And we cultivate that. Again, you don't have to take the most difficult political figure you possibly know and think I've got to have loving kindness toward them. That's an impossible ideal to reach at one goal. But you sure can practice kindness, and when you do, eventually, maybe there's a glimmer where you can begin to see, whoa, they were a little infant too at one time. A little innocent infant, like I've invited you to notice. A little infant at one point. The Buddha made a comment. He said, in this world, hate has never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. In this world, hate has never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. So where are we? Where are you? We need to cultivate, practice loving kindness, this tender regard. It's not necessarily personal. It comes from inside, and it's simply offered like the sun shines on all. That's how it's offered. So that is loving kindness, a tender regard for all. Compassion is the same tender regard for an individual, a being who is suffering. That's compassion. It's not pity. It's different. It is a tender regard that comes from within to a being who is suffering, regardless of who they are. You don't have to agree with what their political position is or anything else about them, but you can have a regard. They're a human being, or they are a being. Many of them aren't human. We share this planet with many other non-human beings. Can we have a tender regard? Sometimes it's easier to have a tender regard for a pussycat than it is for a human being, of course. But can we have a tender regard for those who are suffering, including, and importantly, for yourself? And that's what I have found, and many of us who do teach have found, is the hardest one of all, to have a tender regard for yourself. We are so harsh on ourselves. So we have to practice it. We do practice it. And we use reins. So I'm not going to... Yes, I will say another word or two about that. How do we do it? By embracing our difficult emotions. By embracing that in yourself that you don't like. That doesn't mean perpetuating it and continuing, but instead of pushing it out the door, ignoring or denying it, you acknowledge it. Oh, this is here. You're kind to it. What we usually do when there's something that is difficult, we turn our back on it, we deny it, and we push it out the door. It is exactly the wrong thing to be doing. We need to embrace. It's like we would embrace an orphan or a little puppy, but instead we allow our difficult emotions and that which we don't like about ourselves to be ostracized. It needs to be embraced. You can talk kindly to it, recognizing it. We just went through RAINS. That's how we do it. We embrace it. So talking about that, and that's really brief, I would like to share with you what some of you have already heard a few times already from me. And that is a practice that I have taken up over the years and have just realized that I could share it with you. And that is using an endearment in my internal dialogue. And it has been so amazing. I started doing it simply because originally I was practicing kindness, loving kindness. And then it just happened on its own. But that means talking to myself kindly. When I make a mistake, using an endearment. Okay, that was a mistake, and maybe my name. Okay, Susan, and often I'll call myself Susie when I'm really trying to be nice. You know, okay, Susie, darling, this wasn't good. Darling, we're going to really try this again. Darling. Now, some of you guys won't use darling, but you might use friend or buddy. And as I think I've told some of you before, I was talking to somebody about that, and he says, I use Bubba. And I said, Bubba works. If it works for you, that's great. Use whatever works for you. But talk to yourself using endearment instead of the harsh language we usually talk to ourselves with, right? Oh, God, that was so stupid. How could I have done that? I'm such an idiot, and blah, blah, blah. I think we all know what that voice is like. I'm such an idiot, and you catch yourself doing that. Darling, sweetheart, yeah, this was bad. You're not really an idiot, though. I mean, you can hear this kind of conversation can go on, and it isn't dumb. It has a remarkable effect. What's the effect? It softens you right at the heart where you are raw and harsh. Just at that place where you're harsh and you're raw, you become softer. You use it over time. I'm not saying once, twice, a week, a month. Make it a lifetime practice. This is a lifetime practice of kindness in an informal way. You see, we practice loving kindness formally as we did tonight, but you can do it informally, right there in the moment you're sitting in front of your computer. Oh, you don't have to use it only for yourself. You know, you can use it for other people. Somebody is chewing you out about something. Now, you don't have to call them darling necessarily, but in your mind you might say, okay, friend, I've heard you. You know, instead of just tightening up like that, and you're less likely to curse them out verbally if you have already in your mind thought of something. Now, the fact is you can still be angry, you can still be effective, but you don't have to be harsh. You don't have to react like that. So I invite you to consider using an endearment in your everyday life as you speak to yourself, as you speak to others, as you speak in circumstances that are irritating to you, like when your computer, I don't know, crashes or does something. Okay, darling, we're going to get you working now. You know, just at the time when you want to curse your computer out. Now, this isn't being idiotic. You know, the computer's not listening to you. What it does, though, it changes you. You're the one that's being changed with all this, not your computer. It's maybe dead, but you're changing. Okay? So just offering this. And obviously, we're talking about loving kindness, and we're talking about it for others who you consider difficult. And in this year of an excruciating, I think it's a great word, campaign, can we think, even begin to turn our minds toward the idea of maybe instead of tensing up entirely at whichever candidate you cannot stand, how about remembering that they too at one time were a vulnerable little baby? Just admitting the possibility. Admitting that as a possibility. And I was saying, as I was thinking about this talk and thinking, none of us single-handedly are going to change the world. But I think there is something that is so important to remember, whatever all of our collective impact is, this is an interdependent world. The Buddha talks about it, dependent origination, as some of you know. All things are interdependent. What's that, the butterfly effect? Butterfly flaps its wing down in Brazil, there's a tornado in Texas. Everything is interdependent on other things. So it's always been. It's always been. The Greeks say, old wine, new bottles. Right? Old wine, new bottles. That's what's going on here. We've got new bottles, new packages. We've got the suffering, the acrimony, all of that is still there. I mean, the Buddha at one point talked about his own generation back 2,500 years ago, and he said it's a tangled ball of grass. It's covered with blight. I mean, he's got some really graphic words talking about the people in his generation. Well, what's new? What's new under the sun? So here we are, seeing this maybe a little bit more impersonally, and recognizing that in the midst of all of this, our practice is so precious that we can do this at a time, especially at a time when it is not conducive to it. Do you realize how important that is? How really important, how precious this is. To me, it's something that I greet with tremendous sense of humility, like, wow, how is it I ever, amidst all of this mess that so many things seem to be, and the acrimony, that to come upon a practice that is so beautiful, is to be able to express it, is an incredibly precious gift. It's a wonder and a mystery. And I think together, to be in a group that is doing that is just quite amazing. So I think I will leave it right there and thank you for listening.